Hello and good afternoon. Can everyone hear us okay? Sounds good? Great. My name is Eric Zenz. I'm a program manager on the Office 365 Groups team.
And I'm Vince Smith. I'm a program manager on the identity team.
And you're here to learn about managing Office 365 Groups. So it's important to note that I'm on the Office 365 team. Vince is on the on the identity team in Azure. And the reason we're both here is because successful management and administration of Office 365 Groups does require an understanding of the collaborative aspects, which our teams are responsible for, as well as the directory aspects of an Office 365 group. So a lot of the sessions you're going to see today claim to give you a set of tools that you can take back to manage some function of some service in Office 365. The claim that we're making today is a little bit bolder. We're claiming that after today's session, we're going to make you heroes. We're going to make you heroes on behalf of your end users, allowing end users to come together and collaborate with Office 365 groups to seamlessly work across our suite. We're also going to make you heroes in the eyes of your IT department and your information security practices by ensuring that the data that folks are exchanging in groups is governed, managed, and secure. We're going to do this in 4 sections. First, we're going to talk about the infrastructure of Office 365 Groups and the basics of administering the service. Next, Vince is going to lead you through some examples of how you can extend Office 365 Groups to match your business processes. After that, I'll talk about security and compliance, and then if we've made the case that you can use Office 365 Groups in your own environment, we'll talk a little bit about how to get to groups from the collab tools that you're probably using today. Now, just as a quick show of hands, how many folks out there have Office 365 groups in their environment today?
Nice.
All right. Thanks very much. For the rest of y'all, we're hoping that with the content that we're about to show today, that your hand will be raised when we give this session next year with the new features for managing groups at that point. So first up, infrastructure and administration. At the end of about the first 30 minutes, you'll understand how groups work and you'll understand where you need to go to perform core administration on Office 365 groups. If you've been to Ahmed and Christoph's presentation this morning, you probably got the pitch about what groups are for and why they're important. Just as a bit of a refresher, we think Office 365 groups are a complete collaborative solution across the Office 365 suite. The promise that we make with Office 365 groups is that they are as easy to form in our suite and as natural to form in our suite as the formation of teams and groups happens physically in your companies today. Today, people find each other, they find projects that they need to be involved in, they come together and they just start engaging, they start working. And no matter where that team goes, that team is always a team, regardless of the tools that they're using or the locations that they are in your building. The same thing with Office 365 groups. When a team forms inside the suite, a team is a shared construct of membership and the tools that a team needs to use to get their work done. So when that team needs to communicate, there's a group email, there's a group mailbox available for their communication as well as their calendaring needs. When that team needs to share and collaborate on files, there's an underlying SharePoint site, and we've newly exposed the SharePoint site as a collaborative asset for Office 365 groups. When that team needs to have a quick call or to start a meeting, Office 365 groups are an identity that you can communicate with and message in Skype. And when that team needs a plan or when that team needs a dashboard in Power BI, that team will find easy access with the same set of people in Power BI, Planner, and if that's not enough, in tens of other third-party services that are connected to Office 365 groups with connectors. All of this is made possible because Office 365 groups are a part of the substrate of the suite. They fully participate in the Microsoft Graph so that the applications can interchange data seamlessly. And as a third party, you can program using that same graph intelligence to be able to easily access different aspects of Office 365 groups and the related data. And all this is built on top of the platform of Office 365 with the governance that you trust and expect in the services that we build. When a user creates a group, what happens under the covers is whether they create in Exchange or in SharePoint or Planner, et cetera, we create an entity in Azure Active Directory. And that entity stores a few key shared properties. The first is that the record in Azure stores a shared notion of membership. And this enables the seamless interactions across the suite, so that like if you try to upload a file to the group site or you try to send a mail to the group, if you're on the team, you're assured to have access. From there, the directory also masters a set of shared properties that define how the group behaves across the suite. So properties like whether or not guest access is enabled, the privacy type for the group, whether it's private or public, those are all held in common because they're mastered in the directory. And lastly, the directory is a store for the pointers to the apps that participate with Office 365 groups. So when a group gets created, a mailbox gets created in Exchange, and that there's a pointer that is a part of the directory object. A site is provisioned inside of SharePoint. That pointer is in the directory object, and so on and so forth. So that when apps need to interact with each other, they know where to find the pointers, and so on. So it's also important to note that when you modify a shared property inside a group, whether you're in Exchange or SharePoint or in Planner, those modifications are actually made, or if you're a third party, those modifications are made directly to the group object and then percolate down to the services that are connected. And it's this loose coupling that allows us to add new workloads over time, and also allows you as a third party to consume the same sort of integration that we build natively for our first-party apps. Okay, so now that we understand a little bit about how groups work under the covers and what happens when someone hits the New button, we want to give you a primer on where to go to administer groups and what the various administration services are for. So for the UI, there are a number of places that you could interact with an Office 365 group. The Office 365 Admin Center is your starting point for administering, reporting, or auditing on group use. You'll see a lot of that throughout the demos today. So if you wanted to perform any of the basic CRUD, the create, read, update, and delete actions on a group in the UI, you could start from the Office 365 Admin Center, or you could take advantage of the new Office 365 Admin app. It's great. It's available on all platforms. If you're not using it today, I highly encourage that. But if you're on the road and somebody's complaining that they need you to make a group public so that they can share information with the organization, and for whatever reason they weren't able to find that in the UI, you could perform tasks like that through the admin app. Adding membership, it's a snap. If you wanted to manage the directory nature of a group, so if you wanted to do directory management at scale and perform a task like setting dynamic membership on a group, as we'll demo later, the the Azure AD Admin Portal is the right surface for you. So whether you want to set up a dynamic group, as I mentioned before, or you want to audit the changes to properties on the group object, those tasks are performed in the Azure AD Admin Portal. And lastly, where are our Exchange administrators in the room? All right. So this group of people who just raised their hands are probably very familiar with the Exchange Admin Console. And the Exchange Admin Console also exposes groups because it's our opinion that if you're using distribution lists today, you should consider strongly, instead of creating a distribution list, to create a group. And not only do we build groups into that user experience, but we also built some tools in over the last few weeks to help you get from distribution lists to groups. We'll demo that near the end. For those of you that are more inclined to use PowerShell, groups have a full suite of PowerShell methods. So if you're an Exchange PowerShell Pro or a AD PowerShell expert, you'll find that you'll be able to naturally interact with Office 365 groups in the places you expect. The CRUD operations for groups are exposed through Exchange PowerShell and the unified group methods. So get and set unified group is an example. From the AD PowerShell, get and set MSOL group is an analogous method for creating groups. The unified groups links methods are for managing membership. And so if you needed to programmatically update membership on a group, you can do that there. And lastly, and the PowerShell that we're probably going to touch on most today, are the MSOL settings methods, which are for setting policy either at the tenant level as it affects Office 365 groups, or at an individual group level. So now that we know where to go to get the work done, let's talk about what you'll do when you get there. So we're hoping that on Monday, when you return to your office and you're thinking fondly about all your memories of the Ignite conference, that you'll remember this session and how we enabled you to create a pilot for Office 365 groups in your organization today. And so if you're able to follow these steps either on the tape or with the deck when you get back home, we're hoping you'll successfully be able to roll out a pilot that adheres to your organization's governance requirements. And so to get there, we need to talk about the things you'd want to accomplish in such a pilot. So some feedback we get from large customers is that they want to enable people to create groups on their own, but they're worried about what the effect of the masses creating groups may do to their directory. And the answer to that we have today is the notion of naming policy. So with naming policies, and presently they're configured in Exchange Admin Center, you can define a policy that appends either a string and or a user property to a group. And what you do with that is if you say you want to open up creation of groups to your entire organization, but you're worried about the marketing team in Tulsa taking over marketing@contoso.com for your entire organization, you can set up a naming policy that prepends region to the beginning of any groups that users create. And in that way, you can make sure that anybody who creates a group through Outlook or OWA creates a group that is prepended with their user property, so it's clear that it was created for users in Tulsa and not just the marketing group for all of Office 365. The other property that you can set in Exchange Admin Center today is this notion of blocked words, and that's a way of helping keep your directory clean. Certainly clean of any words, any common words that you don't want to appear in there, or any code words you don't want to appear in your directory. I mentioned sort of in the middle of that applies to groups that are created in Exchange or in Outlook. That is, by the numbers, the vastness of groups that get created in Office 365 today. But if you were to create a group in Planner today, the policies in Exchange Admin Center don't presently apply to those. Luckily, Vince is going to talk about how we're promoting those features to the Azure Active Directory in just a few short weeks. So from there, now that you feel comfortable about setting a naming policy that helps identify user-created groups in your organization, as a part of a pilot, you'd probably want to control who's in the pilot and who's not, and allow the users that are in the pilot to create groups. That is easily done through a set of PowerShell we have on screen that I'll demo in a few minutes. But basically, the nuts and bolts of it are that you want to create a security group, who are the folks who are allowed to participate in the pilot and create groups, and then you give that security group a permission through policy to create Office 365 groups. This affects groups created in any of our first-party applications. It also includes groups created through Graph or any other third-party source. Another thing you might want to do while you're exploring Office 365 groups or rolling out is you may want to create some functional groups. You may want to create the marketers. You may want to create the all-company group. And you're already painstakingly managing the changes to users' properties on their own AD objects already. So you shouldn't also have to painstakingly manage a group called marketers@contoso.com. You should just be able to leverage the investment you've already made in your directory, in your user property setting. And so dynamic groups are a great solution for that. They allow groups to be created once, and within seconds of update of user properties, the membership in those groups will be managed over time. So some other policies you'd want to set, particularly in larger organizations. Here at Microsoft, when you create a site or when you create any sort of space for collaboration, you're actually subject to some usage guidelines that are defined by IT. And those guidelines, they are a part of your employment agreement. It is important for an IT organization to communicate that to users and remind them of their obligations so that they behave well with content, that they do the right things. And Office 365 groups give you a facility to remind the users in your tenant what proper use of groups actually are. Building on that, some organizations have a structured or advanced information protection practice and use a notion of classification to help further educate users about the proper use of content in the organization. So an example would be if you've ever watched any spy movie, you've seen manila folders with like top secret or super secret or confidential stamped on them. Those labels actually, like, that's not just the stuff of spy journals, that stuff actually matters in a number of large organizations, particularly in Department of Defense, other government groups as well. And so Office 365 groups now will enable you to define a set of classifications that not only educate your users about what proper use is while they're in the moment of working with a group, but also it helps, you can use that as a property and query for that and actually extend policies and programmatically interact with groups based on those classifications. And Vince will show you a little bit of that. Lastly, this is probably the only place that made the most sense to talk about this. We have two privacy types in the service today. We have public groups, which are available to everyone, and private groups where the content is only available to the members. Our customers have asked us for something a little bit more secluded and private, and those are hidden membership groups. Particularly, customers in the US education space need to protect the membership of the group as data that is only shared to other members of the group. And so presently, you can anoint a group as a private group as a hidden membership group through Graph, as shown on the screen here, and soon natively in PowerShell. A lot of the partners that we have in the education space are already using this to create class groups that have hidden memberships so that they can roll out within US education. So now that you're aware of all the things that you could do and control as a part of your pilot, I want to spend a few minutes actually showing how that comes to be and to give you a demonstration of what you could do at 10 o'clock on Monday when you get to your desk to set up your pilot for Office 365 groups. Give me 5. Okay, great. Let me just refresh to make sure I've got my session. Perfect. So this is the Azure AD admin portal, and this is the place that you would go to manage the directory notions of your group. So the tasks I'm going to perform in here are, first, I'm going to create or manage the rules of a dynamic group so that I can target a dynamic group to a very specific membership in my organization. And then I'm going to begin on the path of setting up my pilot by by grabbing a group that I want to make the administrators for Office 365 groups. So when I go into the list of all groups in the Users and Groups section, I can see a list of all the groups. It's the Office 365 groups, existing distribution groups, or security groups. And what I have here is an existing dynamic group. So what I have presently is I have all the people in the group, in the company, whose standard title is sales and marketing. And I have that with this rule here. Now, if you went to Christoph's presentation this morning, you probably saw a different version of this UI. The version that they were showing was the existing Azure AD admin UI. This is the new portal that we're rolling out. And so we don't yet have the easy drop-down selector for creating a rule. That's, of course, coming pretty soon. But here you can actually just use syntax that's well documented on the web for creating a dynamic group whose user department is sales and marketing. Now, beyond that, say I want to target this thing to something a little bit more specific, and because my typing on stage is woefully bad, let me just go ahead and paste that in. What I've done here is I've actually added a separate clause to say that not only do I want the sales and marketing folks, but I also want the folks who are only in Tulsa, which should save after just a few seconds. And then within seconds, and it can take seconds or short minutes, the membership is automatically now, it should decrease from 8 members here that were in the group before. It'll decrease to 3. We can come back and check on that in a few minutes. So the other thing that I wanted to do while I'm here in the portal is I want to create a security group for the folks that I want to be in my pilot. and from there, I want to then use that security group in the PowerShell to apply that to my allowed group creators. So what I'll do first is I've got an existing security group. You probably already have one of these anyways. In an educational setting, you probably have a faculty group. Here at Contoso, we set up a group that was explicitly the people that are in the pilot called Allowed to Create Groups. And what I need to get is I need to get the object ID for this group. And this is how I will tell PowerShell which group is allowed to create Office 365 groups. Now, what I'll do next is I'm going to go over to PowerShell, and I need to actually clear out the existing policy so I can show you how to set it. Here in PowerShell, I'm going to next get a template that will help me apply all the right settings and then help me modify the ones that I care about. So the PowerShell I want to call is get msol all settings setting template. And actually, let me pipe that to list. Sorry, I already had a table. So what you can see is that this is the list of all of the settings templates that could possibly be applied in my organization. And the one that I care about right now is the groups.unified settings template. Now, the important information that I need out of this is I need the object ID for this template. And so with that object ID, as well as my object ID for the group that I want to allow to create groups, I'll go and grab a separate set of PowerShell that I would have no chance of typing correctly in one go in front of an audience. And let me talk through this. So what I need to do now is I need to apply settings, and I need to construct a settings object that I will apply that will then control how many users get to create groups and a bunch of other policy. So the setup for that is that I'd get the template, and the template is the groups.unified template. And then from there, I would construct a settings object from that policy. And the policies that are material to this are, first, I need to disable group creation. Next, I need to specify the group that is then allowed to create groups, and that's the object ID of the security group I had before. And while I'm in here, this settings template actually does pretty much everything I want to do. It actually will set the usage guidelines URL, and I can define those classifications. And if you go to try this at home, please don't include spaces between classification. There may be a bug in there that hopefully gets fixed by the time you get back. So simply running that will actually apply all of the settings that I needed to apply to make my groups pilot work. And that is provable here in OA. So if I were to go OA and edit a group on that same tenant, you can see the usage guidelines down on the lower left is the URL that I'd applied in the PowerShell. You can also see that list of classifications. Now this group has a classification because obviously I've been through this demo a couple of times, but there's a classification already listed here in the header, but those classifications are here. And then if I wanted to check to make sure that a user couldn't create groups, I'll go ahead and log in as, I think this is Anne. Anne's not an administrator, she's just a regular old user. And then when Anne goes to create a group in Planner, she'll find that she can't create a group in a plan because that would necessitate creating a group. Similarly, if she went to OA, she'd get the same experience. If she went to Outlook, she would get the same experience. So no matter where Anne goes, because Anne's not in the pilot, Anne's not allowed to create groups. Let me go back to the... And so that's it. So hopefully we've shown you enough to make you feel comfortable about setting up a pilot and constricting the initial use and then ensuring that your business policies are set. Vince is going to now take you through a few of the next features that are coming soon for managing groups.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so Eric talked about the things that we have released recently. I'm just going to talk through some of the stuff that's really near release and will be coming out very, very soon. So let's talk about expiry and soft delete. So what we've heard back from customers is that the proliferation of groups at an organization, particularly organizations that have a self-service group creation model, can be a real pain. So to address that, or to help address that, we will soon be releasing a feature called Expiry. How Expiry works is, as an admin, you can set up the lifetime of groups in my organization, let's say 60 days. And as a group nears that lifetime, the group owner is sent an email that says, hey, your group is going to be deleted soon because it's nearing the end of its life. Would you like to renew the life cycle on this group? And the group owner can click renew in the email, and the group is renewed. Or if they don't click renew in the email, the group is deleted. So it's pretty straightforward. But what happens when that group owner doesn't click renew on a group that actually is in use? Maybe they're on vacation, or they just missed it. Or even more generally, what happens when a group owner deletes a group that is still in use accidentally? So to help with that, we're going to roll out support soon for soft delete. And soft delete allows you to restore a deleted group for up to 30 days after it was deleted. What this, and if you're familiar with how this works for users today in Azure Active Directory, it's very, very similar. The difference is that when you restore a deleted group, not only is the group object in Azure AD restored, but all of the resources that back that group. So the mailbox, the folder in SharePoint, tasks and planner, etc. The next slide talk about the profanity checking and banned words. So another problem or another pain point we've heard from customers is particularly when you allow end users the ability to create groups. And this is primarily important, and we've heard a lot of this feedback from education, but as well as in enterprise. Microsoft IT is a great example. They've given us this feedback. If you allow end users to create groups, sometimes you end up with inappropriate words in those group names, right? So what we've done is we've worked very closely with Microsoft Compliance to come up with a list of kind of common profanity that we can then use as a feature where you can enable the ability to block group creation if the group contains a word from this list. And so Eric and I have spent a lot of time going over that list, and I can tell you it's very extensive. So all of the big hitters are there, as well as lots of profanity that I had never seen before. And I feel like I'm fairly proficient at cursing. So you could count on it, like most everything you could ever think of is caught there. And not only is it for English, but we actually, it's supported over 100 different languages and dialects. In addition to that, we're going to allow you the ability to set a custom banned words list, similar to what Eric talked about earlier in Exchange, except when we release this very shortly, we're essentially moving that functionality from Exchange into the directory so that, again, not only groups created through OA or Outlook are blocked, but groups created through any interface, any endpoint, whether that be Planner or SharePoint or directly through Graph. So lastly, I talk about naming policy. Naming policy or naming convention, as Eric mentioned previously as well, has the ability to append either a static string or an attribute from the creating user object, to the group name as that group is created. So today that's supported through Exchange. We're going to move that functionality to the directory. So again, not just groups created through Outlook or OA, but any group created through any of the workloads or through any even third-party interface will be, that group naming convention will be applied consistently. I guess then to close out this section, if you think back, what we would like people to take away is the idea that through group creation permissions, through usage guidelines, through classifications, all the things that Eric talked about that we have shipped thus far, as well as expiring soft delete, our profanity and bad words checking, a naming policy in core directory, as well as functionality that we'll continue to roll out that we're really committed to helping large organizations manage their groups, right? So to really enable end user creation and feel safe about that. With that, I'm going to do just a quick demo. It's very straightforward. So I have a tenant where I have enabled both the profanity checking, the general profanity checking, as well as a blocked words list. I'm not going to demo the profanity checking. The screens are huge, and yeah, you don't want to see that. But I will demo the banned words list. So I've created a banned words list that contains both swear and curse. So what we'll do is I'm Joe user here, and I'm going to create a group. First, let's just create a Ignite demo group. So because Ignite demo passes the requirements, there's no banned words in it, it should be created successfully. Just needs to prepare. However, if I create a group with swear in the name, you'll see that, oh, no, this is blocked, right? You can't have words with swear, or excuse me, you can't have groups with swear in it.
And so, yeah, there we go. No matter where you are inside the suite, we did the demo in OA because that's, since we're working on it, that's the workload that's furthest along. But just like Planner and the other workloads, all of those same protections would apply to those other endpoints through the work that should be rolling out soon.
That's correct. Everything I'm demoing is really about how we get that centrally in the directory and out of a specific workload.
Yeah.
So next, I'd like to just spend a short amount of time and talk about extensibility or programmability using Microsoft Graph. So extensibility is really all about using groups as a platform for building rich, customized experiences. And for IT pros, like a lot of folks in the audience, it's really about building those rich management dashboards and line of business apps, and doing it in a way that's much, much easier than it was on premises, where you have an API set for Exchange over here, you have an API set for SharePoint over here that's completely separate. Now we have Planner and things like this. So how do we get to a consistent shared API set? So if I can just see a show of hands, who all here is either using Microsoft Graph or AD Graph today? Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So if there's one big takeaway I want folks to leave here with, it's just how easy it is to get up and running with Microsoft Graph and get up and running with programming and building your applications on Microsoft Graph by using the Microsoft Graph Explorer. And I'll go into a demo about using that in a little bit here. So first, just real quick, what is the Microsoft Graph? The Microsoft Graph is a single unified endpoint for accessing data across Microsoft services. What that means for this session is that it's a unified endpoint for accessing the data that backs Office groups, right? So that whether that be files in SharePoint or messages and conversations in Outlook, tasks in Planner, etc. And not only is it the way to access the data in those services, it's about accessing the relationships between the people and the groups, and it's more than just the data. It is a true graph in that sense. So what I'll do here is let's jump over to a demo. Have a look around here. So here I have the Microsoft Graph. I'm looking at it through Microsoft Graph Explorer. I just went to graph.microsoft.io, and I click on the Graph Explorer tab. Now I had to log in first, and when you log in, you're just taken to That's very standard Azure AD login page, just like you would anywhere else. And as you log in, it'll take you right back here. So what you see is the graph is a RESTful interface. So what you see is the option you have get, post, patch, delete. These are just synonyms for create, read, update, delete. Right? It's the same actions there. I have a beta and a V1 or GA endpoint. Let's just go ahead and just run this is the default query that you get when you come to this page, right? This is automatically pre-populated for you. We'll just run that. And what we got back here was, this should look fairly familiar. This is the attributes out of Azure Active Directory for this user object, right? So you've probably seen this a bunch of times in various different UIs. So that's all interesting, right? Oh, great. I can see assigned plans, and I can see, postal code, department, display name, UPN's in there somewhere. But let's go to, here's all the email for this user, right? So here are messages. You can see, you can see subject lines and bodies. So just by going off that same endpoint, there's a whole nother entity that talks about messages just for my user object. As well, I can go to drive, root. Here are files in SharePoint, right? For my OneDrive, right? You can see here's the Ignite demo docs, right? So not only that, I can go to excuse me. There we go. So I can go to member of, which shows me all the groups I'm a member of. And from here, let's just pick one. I'll just pick this group here. I can go groups. There's the group. So this is the attributes out of Active Directory for this group that I'm a member of. But I can also, for this group, I can go, oops, let me get that back. I can go to, here's the conversations for that group. So, and you can see reply to, the sender, and I can take the UPNs for the reply to and senders and keep going, right? You can really start to see the relationship that's formed using Microsoft Graph. But Microsoft Graph is not only just for the end user information, things like the conversations and the files, it's also for management. So like Eric had demoed earlier around how to use PowerShell to set a group setting. What I'll do next is I'll actually show how through Microsoft Graph we can set a setting on a group level. So let's have a look. So Eric showed you the directory settings templates. So I'm just going to do the same thing through the Microsoft Graph Explorer. And everything I'm going to do here, folks, is all, you can do the same thing in PowerShell. None of this is as specific just to Microsoft Graph. But you can see the template that Eric had filled out earlier. So how it works is with a setting, you get a settings template, and then you instantiate an instance of that settings template as a setting in your directory. So, and on a directory level, like what Eric had set, where you have the usage guidelines, the classification list, etc., that's a tenant level setting. So that's how he instantiated it, was off the tenant. The setting template I'm going to use is this one here, which is the setting for a specific unified group. And you use this to toggle the ability to add guests to a group. So you can enable guests for your organizations at the tenant level, but you can disable guest access on a per group basis. So what I'll do is, everyone just memorize this ID here for me real quick, because we're going to need that later. And I'm going to go find a group that we would want to disable guest access for. So I'll use Graph to query Graph for groups where classification is high. And as Eric had mentioned, high classification, or at Microsoft we use HBI for high business impact. These are the kind of groups that typically have either customer data in it or trade secrets or things you likely may not want to have guest access enabled for. So what I'll do is I'll take this object ID for this group, and now through Microsoft Graph, I'll do a post. So a post here is actually like a create. I'm going to create a new setting. And the setting is off of, you'll notice this is the object ID for the group here. And I'm going to post a new settings off of this group. And in the body, I'm going to post a new settings of this setting template, a new instantiation of this setting template. And you can see that the template ID is the template ID from the template that allows me to toggle that, that ability to add guests to the group. So we'll run this. It will succeed. And now I can go back over to Joe user. So Joe's tired of creating swear word groups. And I'm going to go to core team, which is the group that, that we pulled up here, right? This is the core team group. Excuse me. This is the core team group. And Joe's going to try to add Sally at contoso.com. And you'll see that Joe's not able to add Sally because we've set that setting that denied the ability to add guests to groups. However, I could go over to my Ignite demo, and from here, this will actually succeed, right? Because we only disabled guest access for that one group. So let me go back to the presentation. So to wrap up this section, a couple of just big takeaways I would hope people will leave with from this section. One is that the Microsoft Graph Explorer, go try that out. If not tonight, Monday, start playing around, start getting used to it, because you realize that the Microsoft Graph is not just a deep API thing that you're doing as you're building applications. You can really jump in with Graph Explorer and start getting your feet wet and understanding how Graph works, and you'll find a lot of value there. So we have and you can get there through graph.microsoft.io. We have a GA endpoint, which is the endpoint you'll use for your production mission critical kind of applications. And we have a beta endpoint. And the beta endpoint's where a lot of the new functionality will show up first. We vet it, we take feedback, we make changes if necessary, though not usually, and then we'll roll that out to the GA endpoint. So Microsoft Graph is it's a single endpoint for all group data. It's a single endpoint for all data across Microsoft services, and we will continue to light up additional services behind Graph as we move forward. We've made a big bet on Microsoft Graph. But for group information, it's how you get to tasks and OneNote and OneDrive and Mail and Calendar, all of these things. We release new functionality in Microsoft Graph almost every week. So keep track of, if you're interested, keep track of the blogs on Office, the Office blog, Office Graph blog, as well as the Azure AD Graph blog. One interesting feature we just rolled out was webhook notifications, which allows you to subscribe to events on conversations and calendar events in Exchange, as well as file updates in SharePoint. And if there's one last thing to talk about here, it's that if you're building new applications, we really urge you to prefer the Microsoft Graph over the Azure AD Graph, which is available today. There's a bit of a functionality gap right now, and we're working very, very quickly to close that to get the same functionality through Microsoft Graph that's available through AD Graph. And moving forward, you'll see new functionality showing up on the Microsoft Graph only. If you have applications that are accessing the AAD Graph today, though, don't worry. It's fully supported. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. Eric, you want to talk about security compliance and audit?
Sure, thanks. So what I like about Vince's section on extensibility is the primer for what you would do if you have a policy in your organization that isn't met with the policies that we apply for Office 365 groups. And so you can inspect individual groups for properties and make precise group-level modifications to the settings just to match your own business or information security practices. If you want to learn more about that, David Johnson from our own Microsoft IT team is actually giving a few theater sessions on how they've been using some of exactly the same technology to manage Office 365 groups. I think he's got a session tomorrow. So the goal in this next section is to help you understand how to keep information that's in your groups safe and ensure the proper ongoing use of Office 365 groups in your environment. So first up, we want you to know that your data in Office 365 groups is safe and secure, whether your users are accessing it in Outlook or Outlook on the web, or even using our great Outlook Groups apps. And so a few months ago, I think, we made an announcement, or at least we announced on the roadmap site that we released mobile application management for Office 365 groups. So if you have Intune or another provider for managing device settings, you can configure those settings and apply them to the to the Outlook Groups app. So if you require a PIN for user access to your data, you can ensure that the app requires a PIN, or if you want to make sure that users can't download files, those policies are recorded to by the app. It's also worth noting at this point that privacy conversion is it's a feature of the service. If you find that you have a group that really should be available to the entire organization, it's easy for an end user through any editing experience that they can see in Planner or Outlook, etc., to be able to modify that privacy setting to either make something more public and share it with the great search technology that Amit and Christoph demoed this morning, or if need be, to make something private to only its members. And so those privacy settings, they can be modified in the UI, in the admin UI, in the PowerShell, and through the graph. So you're in complete control of the privacy of your group's data. So just last week or so, we announced the availability of guest access for Office 365 groups. And while we rolled that out, we also recognized that we needed to apply the same concepts of policy to guest access for Office 365 group. There are 3 levers, if you will, to manage guest access in your environment as it relates to groups. The first is a high-level switch for managing the ability for guests to be added to your organization. And so if you were to turn this setting off, no more guest users could ever be invited into your tenant. That's available. All these settings are available in the Office 365 portal. We'll trip through there in a moment. This one is in just where you would find the rest of your security settings around privacy and sharing in the settings and privacy section. Next up, you can control whether or not you could allow guests to be added to your organization, but you could prevent guests to be added as members to groups, or allow it. And so those switches are available in actually the Groups settings blade, so it's an add-in under Office 365 Admin Center. But the setting controls whether or not you can add a guest as a member to a group. There's also another setting in there that allows adding of guests to the let me take a step back. It allows whether or not guests have access to to group data. And so if for whatever reason you wanted to stop guests from having access to groups after they'd been invited, you could actually just use that one switch there. And at that point, guests would lose their ongoing access to group data. If you want to control specific groups' guest access, presently that's available in PowerShell and in the graph, as Vince demonstrated earlier. And that's how you could get very fine-grained about managing some groups allowing guest access and other groups not allowing guest access. Let me serve as the human decoder ring for this slide. When you perform an information protection action on an Office 365 group, or really any asset in the suite, you're doing one of two basic things. You are either performing an e-discovery action on that, where you're searching for content in your organization, or you're doing a preserve/delete operation. I'm happy to report that Office 365 groups fully support e-discovery inside as a property in Office 365. The nuance with groups is that because they are constructed of a site and a mailbox, you need to make sure that when you're specifying an e-discovery search, you're actually addressing the sites of groups as well as the mailboxes of groups. Preservation and deletion. Presently, preservation and deletion policies don't apply to Office 365 groups, sites, or mailboxes. But if you don't walk to the session here at 4 o'clock in C302, you'll see a demonstration of preservation and deletion policies on Office 365 groups. And you'll actually see some advancements we're making in the Security and Compliance Center to treat groups as a first-class object so that you no longer have to specify the site separately from the mailbox for a group. To give you an idea of what that will look like, you can see here the groups is a type of thing that you can choose as a location to search over, and then within that drop-down or within that class, you can identify groups individually or a set of groups or all groups in your organization. And so over the next couple of months, as we roll that out through preview, you'll find that the deletion and retention policies for Office 365 groups, and really deletion and retention policies all over Office 365, will improve an experience there. So if you want to understand the nuances of when things happened in your service, to understand when somebody gained access to something or when files or mails were accessed, you could do that through a variety of auditing tools that we have inside the suite. If you're concerned with the modifications in the directory for that group, if you care about when membership was updated, or if you care about when a shared property like privacy type or classification were updated, your first stop should be the audit logs in the Azure AD Admin portal. If instead you're looking for some information about who uploaded what file when, who they shared it to, etc., your first stop would be the Office 365 Admin Center's audit reports. But if you really just want to know some quick information about who created what group and who are the owners, the Git Unified Group PowerShell is actually quite powerful. It has tens of properties that can give you basic insight into when groups got created, when groups got last modified. That's always my first stop like running the live site as an engineer. If I want to know the health of an organization's group's usage, I would start directly there with that PowerShell. And last, before the demo, if you want to understand the healthy ongoing use of groups and understand the ROI of groups, or if you want to understand usage of groups over time, we have a couple of reports that have been rolling out in the Office 365 Reports Center. We have some reports on site usage. We have some reports on overall mail engagement as well. The report on site usage is really important because it helps you understand your group's consumption of quota in your organization. And so if you're worried about how many files are being uploaded to all these user-created groups, you have a tool that you can go to understand that. And then, because there was no better place to put it, you could actually manage the quota of an individual group with the set SPO site PowerShell that you're probably familiar with already as a SharePoint admin. So let's go ahead and give you a demo of most of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I think I'm 5, yeah. So the first thing I'd want to do is I'd want to understand the healthy use of groups in my environment. And my first stop is the reporting center in the admin center. And so if I click into usage, I get a dashboard of all the high-level KPIs for all the workloads that are available in this suite. And this is my demo tenant, so it looks a little sparse. But if I wanted to drill into the consumption from my site quota, I could do that pretty easily. I could drill in here into the SharePoint site usage report, And then this shows me how all my sites, how much storage is being allocated and how much file activity is happening for all my sites. But specifically, I want to know about those pesky group sites. And here I can drill in and get a report that's just specific to group sites. But if I wanted to understand what their current quota is and how much they're actually using, I can just add that column, and right here I have a report of where my largest groups are by SharePoint size and how much they're taking away from the overall quota. So you can easily just get this information in one place. You can export this to Power BI, and then from there you could script or edit any, basically you could take action directly from the result of this report. Really powerful stuff. Now, the other thing that is just rolling out now for first release customers, and is actually so new that I don't have data for it yet, is this Office 365 Groups report section. I have another tenant with some data in it, and I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. So the idea is that we give you some indication of the basic health of that group as a collaboration and communication entity. And so you can see here basically the messages received in that given time period, how many messages there are in there, the overall volume of data that's in that group. But if you want to learn more about the membership of that group, we'll actually show you how many members are in that group, and even the count of guest access in that group. And so this is a very powerful report for managing guest access, because you can easily go to this report, you can look at the groups with a high number of guests and really dig in to understand whether you're comfortable with the current users that have access there, and again, use this directly to take action as a next step. So, thanks, Christoph. So, yeah, please hold your questions to the end, but applause are welcome at any time. So the next thing I'd want to do in the admin center here is I'll pretend at Contoso that we have some ongoing litigation with our largest competitor, Litware. And so I've been asked to create a discovery case for Litware in my organization. So what I'll do to start that, wrong tenant. What I'll do to start that is I'll go to the admin center and then go to the compliance center. It's a one-stop shop for all of the discovery and retention work. And from there, I will start an e-discovery case. Now, I've already got a case, just the setup of this takes a little bit of time, but let me walk through what this case does with respect to groups. First, I've got this case, and I defined a search for it. And the search includes, it is specifically searching over the engineering group's mailbox and its site. Now, this is a bit of a far-fetched example, but I wanted to really drive the point home that presently, when you're constructing a discovery, when you're executing a discovery search, you need to make sure that you're addressing site data as well as the group mailbox to get a complete picture of the data for that group. You probably in your application would say all mailboxes and all sites and proceed from there. And this search is it's pretty simple. It's just looking for the term Litware. So if I preview those results, what I will find is I've got a few hits here, and I want to understand whether or not I need to take action. And so when this loads, I get a handy preview UI. And within here, oh boy, I can see actually that we do in fact possess trade secrets, and that Garth has been enthusiastically sharing those trade secrets with the engineering team. Now, if I wanted to drill in even more into seeing what happened here, my next stop is the audit log. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to look for all activities, and I'm going to go back in time about as far as I can. So I'll just go back to when I enabled logging on this tenant, and I'm looking for things that Garth did, and I'm looking for stuff about Litware. So in just a moment here, you'll see all the activity that Garth has performed on files and mail related to Litware. And you can see, On the 17th, he uploaded the file, he viewed the file a couple of times, grabbed some sharing URLs, he downloaded the file to his personal device, which he definitely shouldn't have done, and then opened the file again. So now I need to have an even harder conversation with Garth about the proper use or the improper use of those trade secrets here in the organization. So you can see how these two systems play together. You can really get a sense of how the discovery and the audit log can help you quickly understand some hard questions about the use of groups data. Now, if you, switching gears, if you wanted to understand similar depth of information about how groups have changed over time, you'd want to accomplish that in the Azure AD admin portal. And so if I go back to users and groups and I go to the audit log here, the audit log will show you in painstaking detail all of the modification and access that have happened with an Office 365 group in time, users as well. But it has great search functionality, so if you're really only concerned with the online marketing team, I think it was actually up there a second ago, I can go ahead and see that Garth removed a guest user from this group, so this fellow was a guest user. And then I can also see here that Garth has updated the group. And Garth, good move. He actually set a classification value on a group, but from what I know of this group, this is the wrong classification. So yet again, I need to have another conversation with Garth about the proper use of our data here at Contoso. All right, and that's it for this demo. So can I have the slides back? Thank you. Lastly, hopefully at this point we've made the case for how you can manage groups, how you can extend groups, and how you can ensure that groups are used well in your organization. Let's talk now about how you can get to groups from the tools you're already using. So at the end of this, you'll know how to get to groups from the tools you're using today. And the first thing we announced it or reminded about it this morning, I'll do a bit of a demo of it today, is the migration of DLs to groups is possible for distribution lists that are owned and mastered in Office 365. Today, most distribution lists, if you're a cloud-only customer, most distribution lists that you have are simply upgradable to Office 365 groups in one click. If you are a customer who is in a hybrid environment, if you're a customer who's between environments and you're on your journey to Office 365, we understand that a lot of your distribution lists are probably on premises. At Last Ignite, we talked about a tool called Hummingbird. It's at aka.ms/hummingbird. It's a tool that is extremely useful at getting the membership data of a group, of a distribution list on premises, such that you can then play that into Office 365 as a newly created group. I won't demo it here, but there's a theater session where they go through and show how we can demo a set of groups using Hummingbird and those scripts. If you're friendly with PowerShell, we also released a set of scripts that work for cloud-only customers. That's something that I'll show here in a moment. Now, I mentioned most DLs support one-click upgrade to Office 365 groups. By the numbers, it's more than 2/3. The ones that are not eligible for upgrade at this moment are not eligible because groups just don't have that feature. So as an example, Office 365 groups don't yet have nesting. We're working on nesting. If you have questions or concerns or feedback on how groups nesting should work, definitely talk to the two of us because we're designing that at the moment. But a few other nits, like if you have join or depart restrictions, we don't have that supported on groups. If you have dynamic membership defined in Exchange, we don't automatically upgrade that into dynamic membership in the directory. So there are a few specific types of DLs that won't upgrade. But we do have a script that will help you specifically identify what those are and why. That I'll demo. It's also worth noting at this point that if you're a customer who enjoys public folders, we have not yet built tooling around upgrading public folders to Office 365 groups. There are some vendors in the marketplace. If you go over to the expo hall, I'm sure there are several. The two that we knew at the time of this writing were Binary Tree and Quadratec. They have tooling that will help you get from public folders to Office 365 groups. So if you're interested in that, definitely spend some time in the expo hall and talk to some of our partners. If you're a hybrid user, if you're an organization that is across on-premises and Office 365, Office 365 groups do work for you. The experience that a user whose mailbox is on premises will have is like that of a distribution list. In fact, it's better than that of a distribution list because they have access to the shared document library for the group, the shared notebook for the group, and other assets for the group. What they don't have is, for an on-premises mailbox user, they just don't have access to the conversation history and the calendar. And this is because their Outlook web app, basically their mailbox is on premises and their mailbox doesn't know yet about Office 365 groups. So specifically, the experience, this is like the full experience in Outlook on screen here. The experience for an on-premises user would lack the list of groups, and it would lack the links to the workloads from the group card. But, like I said, it's just like they're experiencing distribution lists today. So if you have a group that has an on-premises member and you send mail to that group, it'll be delivered to that user's inbox. They will see and be able to respond to all of those communications just like they always have. And what's better is they'll get an email with a footer in it that gives them a link to the site. They will also have a link in that footer to be able to control their subscription to the group. And that's a sort of a value add of group communication, is you don't have to depart the group to control whether or not you get the messages in your inbox. You can just unsubscribe. So important notes on hybrid configuration. A reminder, groups are mastered in Office 365. They live in Office 365. And when configured with AD Connect and write-back enabled, groups will get to your on-premises directory as a distribution list. Now, it does require that you have current CUs of Exchange 2013 or Exchange 2016. This is important because if you don't have these CUs, the mail delivery from an on-premises user will not actually deliver to the group. We do some work to the recipient type details and the target address to make sure that the mail goes from the on-premises user to the group and then out to the members. So it's important to note that we need those CUs to be installed and deployed. Okay, so actually, let's do a demo. Let's do that DL migration demo. So I promised that there's a PowerShell script for understanding which groups are viable for upgrade. So let me go ahead and just give you a window into my Exchange Admin Center to show you the set of DLs and groups that we have here. And today I would manage my DLs and groups, where I've always managed my DLs here in the Groups tab. You can see I've got a set of distribution groups. I've got some hierarchical groups. I've got some groups of unknown settings in them. I'm not quite sure which ones would be viable for upgrade. The system will actually prevent you from upgrading a group that is not viable. So we do a check. But if you want to really know what the state of your upgrade viability is, you can easily run a PowerShell script that's available on our website. And it's the get DL eligibility PowerShell. And then I want to pipe that to working directory locally. So what I'll do is this script runs, and this script actually looks at all the distribution lists in my company and runs a set of tests on them, the same tests that we run in the service when we attempt to upgrade a distribution list. After a second or so, this will run. This is much easier to read in Excel. So let me go ahead and open Excel. And I'll grab the list that produced. Oops, wrong file. The eligibility list. There we go. And so if I look through here, you can see in plain text what the state is of every distribution list and what would prevent it from upgrading directly to a group if you wanted to modify it or if you wanted to understand more. So here you can see I've got a group that's a child, I've got a group that's a parent. This one specifically, it's my demo group, is proper. And then there's a set of groups that I have with join or depart restrictions on them, and that's why they're not upgrading. So with this information, then I'm either armed to pipe the results of this directly into another PowerShell to upgrade the groups synchronously. It was on the slide earlier. It takes a little while to run, so I'm not going to do that. Or I can go over to go back to the Exchange Admin Center and select that group and run it. So here it is again. Just simply migrate to Office 365 groups. It tells me it will do no harm if it doesn't make it, and then after a few minutes, seconds, short minutes, the upgrade will complete. It's directly a distribution, it's directly an Office 365 group in my tenant now, and it has maintained the SMTP address. So any of the users that are already familiar with interacting with this group, they don't need to do anything else. They've been emailing this thing for years. Now they can keep emailing it from their inbox. But they'll be delighted to find other experiences that are now tethered to this Office 365 group. I thought I could out-talk it. I couldn't. So let's go ahead back to the slides. OK, so just wrapping up. We're hoping that we made good on the claim that you feel like the heroes you need to be for your end users and the heroes that you need to be for your IT administration and information security teams. You understand the structure, the extensibility, the compliance aspects, and migration to get to groups. And a lot of the functionality that we talked about today was on our administration roadmap from last year and is stuff that we've already shipped. So it's definitely in the top row of the slide. We talked a little bit about nesting groups. If you're interested in learning more or telling us about what your expectations are, please find us here in the booth. We're definitely nearly complete with a lot of the functionality that Vince showed as a part of the admin roadmap. Those features should be rolling out in the next few weeks and short months. Yeah, so there's a roadmap here. There are also some related sessions. A couple shout-outs would be Deepak's session at 4 o'clock on security and compliance, David Johnson's sessions on administration at MSIT, which also pertain to groups. There's a session on Thursday on guest access if you want to learn more about managing that, and the others on the slide here. And so there are two surveys that are important. The one that everybody asks you to do that fills out an evaluation on Vince and me, it's definitely helpful to us. But there's another survey that if you're into surveys, we'd like you to fill out. And that's aka.ms/group survey. That's a survey that we have about your current use or not of groups and what you'd expect to see from us in the future. So if you want to have some feedback on the roadmap, definitely let us know by filling out the survey. OK. And that's it. So thank you all very much for your time. We've been delighted to be here. Thank you.